Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now today I want to talk to you all about my love and adoration of Spider-Man. Obviously I'm in the festive mood, so I'm in a good mood, and this morning what added to my good mood was the release of the Spider-Man Homecoming movie trailer. And I could review the trailer, but ultimately there's going to be a million of those videos out there. And frankly, there's not much to say other than it looks great. Spider-Man looks very Spider-Man-y, just as he did really in Civil War. And Michael Keaton looks as though he's going to be a very interesting villain. Out and out threatening to kill people as the Vulture. So great, wonderful stuff. But this was really, I thought, it was a great opportunity to expand on why I'm excited about the trailer, why I care. And the reason why I care is because I love Spider-Man. Now, my top superhero, my number one favourite is Batman. I think that's fairly obvious from my previous videos, it's fairly obvious from the paraphernalia and books that I have, that Batman is number one. And it's because he's Batman. But in particular, he's a character who's very serious and very clever and self-reliant, and he's a badass ninja, and as my wife would say, he's not been to therapy, so I suppose he does have some weaknesses. But he's a character who I've always most related to, because he's had some tragedy in his life and he's overcome it and so on and so forth. So I from a very young age latched on to Batman as a character who would guide me through life almost, and who I've been absorbing his stories for as long as I can remember. But Spider-Man is a character who I came across in the mid-90s, so I suppose actually maybe a couple of years after Batman, and this character he was instantly one who was friendly, obviously a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He was bright and colourful, very different from Batman, and he was a character who I found myself being very concerned about, because he had problems. He wasn't just a superhero and a millionaire like Bruce Wayne. He was a superhero and a young man, and he's either in high school or in the comics maybe he's a young man with a job. He's struggling to pay the rent or something. He's got Aunt May in his life. He's lost his uncle. He's got girlfriend worries, so on and so forth. And then of course, bad guys coming in and trying to mess up his day. So Spider-Man was a character who was cool, but also who was very oddly relatable. Now that's a strange thing to say, given that I'm a Welsh boy coming from a little town in North Wales, which couldn't be much more different from New York if it tried. But there's something about Peter Parker in particular and Spider-Man which I think is universally loved, and that is his vulnerability and his relatability, his humanity. And I think I often hear people talking about that's why they love Spider-Man, and even, for example, Sam Raimi, when he came to do the Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, talked about that being one of his primary motivators, that actually Spider-Man was the everyday kid. And so that to a certain extent is one of the reasons why I related to him. But I think the first exposure I ever had to him was in the form of the cartoon. The Spider-Man cartoon came out in '94 and ran for a few years, I think maybe '98, '99, and it was such a bold and colourful and clean, crisp interpretation of Spider-Man, but also actually a vision of the Marvel universe. For example, they were unashamedly comic booky. The Kingpin was this great big round man. They weren't trying to sort of make it gritty or tie it in with movies like they do with some of the modern Spider-Man cartoons. You had magic, you had over the top scenarios with laser beams and things. You had bombs. But you also had smaller stories as well, which I think Spider-Man is particularly good at. Is a story that relates to an everyday problem, like trying to pay the rent, trying to get that photograph of Spider-Man to sell to J. Jonah Jameson, this kind of thing. And so in the cartoon, he's probably a bit more on top of things than he is in other mediums. I seem to recall he often had the right smart aleck quip at the right moment. He was very sort of confident in that sense as Spider-Man. but nonetheless, I found him intriguing. And then one day in 1996, I came across this. It's a collector's edition book of The Astonishing Spider-Man, and little did I know that this was actually this was actually a time in Spider-Man's life which was a little bit controversial, shall we say, and that is because of this. There's a storyline where essentially he is a clone, or rather there is a clone, Peter Parker. Ben Reilly and Peter Parker are fighting over who gets to be Spider-Man. And this whole clone saga is one which was my first introduction to Spider-Man, so I've got no real problem with, but which I know, ironically at the time, lots of Spider-Man fans were having trouble with. But the artwork, you can see, was arresting, absolutely beautiful. For example, that's the cover of a story where he beats up what's his name? He beats up Scorpion in the sewers. The artwork combined with the high quality production of this book actually has helped two things happen. One, I can always come back to it and just enjoy it. But number two, it actually kept it in one piece. Some of my other Spider-Man comics aren't quite so well in one piece because frankly, I read them a lot. But there were things in the comic, especially in the drawings in this one, which I really liked. And that was, for example, details like under his arms, you have the webbing there, which is in the Spider-Man Homecoming trailer. It seems that he's had a suit upgrade from Stark, and he has webbing under his arms that help him glide from place to place. I think, I'm not sure if that's the reason that the webbing was under his arms in the comics. I think it was just there partly because it looks really cool, but I like that it's been included in the movie. But anyway, so I can't pretend that I fully grasped the character. What I did though get from this character was a sense of his complex problems, and for example here he's feeling really bad, having been sort of slightly ambushed and hitting someone that J. Jonah Jameson thinks he shouldn't have. So he wasn't just getting it right, and again I kind of related to that. So that was my first exposure to Spider-Man, and then I noticed that same newsagent actually was selling comic books fairly regularly, pretty much on a monthly basis, which expanded on well, not quite that story, although actually this one does have the Traveller in it, who was in at the end of that book, but which certainly expanded on my knowledge of Spider-Man at least. And the artwork again is spectacular. So here we have a Sentinel flying down a building towards Spider-Man, and at this point Spider-Man is not Peter Parker. I think Spider-Man is Ben Reilly. So again, in some respects, I'm sorry to say that actually Ben was my first introduction to Spider-Man. But yeah, I can't apologise for being at the right age at that time to really get into Spider-Man. I remember in particular an issue from October 1996 where Spider-Man was having to explain to a young boy why the Avengers had all died, and I have to say at the time, again, but being in North Wales, I was just getting dribs and drabs here and there. I wasn't fully aware of why the Avengers had disappeared, although there's an issue from January 97, which I also quite like, the sort of sticky Substance Man. But I do remember very, very vividly, this is October 96, seeing adverts like this one: Heroes Reborn, Iron Man, Jim Lee, Scott Lobdell, Will Porter-Chio and Scott Williams, putting the character back into comics. And so basically Iron Man being reborn, quite literally, and being recoloured. So I had the sense that maybe there was some sort of, I didn't really know what the word was, but I guess these days we'd call it rebooting the Marvel franchise, some of the Marvel superheroes. So that sort of gave me a sense that Spider-Man was part of a broader universe, the Marvel franchise universe. But at the time, you got to remember, I wasn't plugged in. I mean, I didn't really know who Iron Man was, and that may sound surprising today. But at the time, I was surviving on dribs and drabs of comics. I wasn't able to to have a full sense of what what was going on in the US in particular. Marvel Comics felt like something which was from another country, from America. And so actually, even amongst my friends in school, the fact that I read these things was very surprising to them. You know, if you go into any school in the Western world, I imagine at the moment, you're going to see lunchboxes with Spider-Man on, you're going to see people talking about the Avengers, you're going to hear all sorts of people pretending to be Iron Man and Hulk at playtime. And in that sense, it was a very different world. The late 90s in North Wales, but also I suspect in much of Britain, were not saturated in Marvel as they are today. And so when the Marvel, I suppose, movies got going, especially, I suppose, in the first really big franchised way in the form of Spider-Man, it was a brave new world. Now, while I do look back at the Sam Raimi SpiderMan Trilogy, I guess, with a fairly critical eye today, there's a healthy dollop of cheese in those films, and the third one certainly isn't particularly good. I also remember that when the first one came out, I wasn't expecting part 2, part 3. I certainly wasn't expecting Spider-Man to one day be part of a Marvel Cinematic Universe. All I wanted was to see Spider-Man in action, and having actually seen the trailers where he was swinging through New York City, it was such a treat to see a live-action Spider-Man that actually that was worth the price of admission, if you see what I mean. But then once I was in the cinema, the fact that the film exposed me to elements of Spider-Man and Peter Parker in particular, which I didn't really get a sense of from the trickle of comics that I was able to get my hands on. You know, for example, the guilt essentially that's driving him in that movie from Uncle Ben's death. Yes, okay, it led to the slightly naff, with great power comes great responsibility mantra, which has been repeated and even parodied, for example, in movies like Deadpool. With great power comes great irresponsibility, I think, was one of the taglines for that movie. It was, at the time, very powerful, and also very, the movie was visually striking. I distinctly recall, at the time, really loving the wrestling sequence, partly because I quite liked wrestling, but also, was it Randy Man Savage, I think, is the wrestler in there? I might be wrong, but I just loved the whole sort of I've got you for 3 rounds, buddy, and the way he counts 3 using those 3 fingers, I found very oddly visually exciting, and also actually seeing Spider-Man in the ring in trainers and a slightly rubbishy costume was also quite cool. So the movies brought something else, and they brought a sense of the live action, but I think they also slightly twinged and tainted Spider-Man for me slightly as well, because of the silliness, because Sam Raimi couldn't help but bring in some of his House of the Dead sensibilities into the Spider-Man movies. I could have done without some of the montages or the musical sequences or whatever, but that's a personal preference, I guess. But it added to my love of Spider-Man, and over the years, I've consumed other formats of Spider-Man. I've played my favourite Spider-Man game is Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube. I think that might have been one of the first videos I ever did on this channel, and the use of webbing in that game in particular was very, very cool. Watch it if you want to know what I'm talking about. But recently, last year basically, I got my hands on this. It's Marvel Comics, The Amazing Spider-Man 36, and this is actually the Marvel, or one of the Marvel responses to 9/11, and in it we see really again what is for me the core of Spider-Man. Spider-Man suffering with the people, and at times not knowing quite what to do. So here he is with his mask half up because he's been drinking some water. He's a superhero who does take water from firemen. He when it's offered, he needs sustenance, and again he was the perfect superhero to go through New York in the aftermath of 9/11, because he is also so human. He needs water. He does get injured and feel pain, and in particular, for example, the most iconic image in this comic is it's this double spread here, which really says it all, to be honest. It's it's just so powerful, and again, that power partly comes not just from the imagery and the facts of 9/11, but also the fact that it's Peter Parker and Spider-Man who's experiencing this. We're not seeing it through Captain America's eyes, although Captain America does turn up in this comic. We're not seeing it, certainly not seeing it through Tony Stark's eyes. What we're seeing is your friend Spider-Man going through and feeling the pain that so many others felt at the time. Again, some of the imagery is so striking, and also striking because for example, I remember seeing. Hang on, let's make sure the light's okay. Seeing this section of the architecture in 9/11 on the news quite often. So it's that's again just added to my kinship, my sense of kinship with Spider-Man, and my adoration and respect for the character. And I think really what I've identified here is that Spider-Man is a conduit for feelings. I think Batman represents an isolation from feelings, whereas Spider-Man, I think, for me, represents a feeling character, a person who cannot help but be affected by the world around him, and whose response to the world around him is compassion, and it's justice, and it's going out every day, even when you can't pay your rent, you're still out there helping the people around you, and that is so admirable in the character of Spider-Man. So this morning, of course, I was excited when Spider-Man Homecoming was the trailer was released. Of course, I've shared it with my friends on Facebook, and of course, I've already watched that trailer about 6 or 7 times. Spider-Man is so important to me. He is part of me, dare I say that. And I think this is a place that so many superheroes take in people's lives. They are projections of parts of yourself, and they become part of yourself. They become mentors in your life. And Spider-Man for me has always been a mentor and a model of compassion and honesty. I think honesty in his conduct with certainly with the emotional reality of the world around him. Of course, he has to have a secret identity, and of course, so in Civil War, that identity is compromised. And in the Civil War comic, that is obviously not in the movie. But whatever. That putting that away. Ultimately, I love Spider-Man, and this is just a fraction of his comics, which I own and have read. For example, just down there behind the camera, I've got various collections and graphic novels and the Civil War story, the art of Spider-Man. But really, what I wanted to show you today was the core. This is the backbone to my love of Spider-Man, and that is from the late 90s, and it is the cartoon, and out of that has blossomed a vital friendship, I suppose. Certainly a vital kinship with Peter Parker across the ocean in New York. Anyway, guys, hopefully this has been interesting and hopefully not too random. As ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.